Hey everybody, Brandon with fastdatascience.ai, and for this video, I'm down here. I'm not way up, oops, over there. So what I wanted to do in this video, earlier this morning, actually, I had the opportunity to give a presentation in Turkey. I wasn't actually there. It was a virtual presentation, but it was for the Turkish Researchers Association 25th Research Summit, and the theme was on being human, obviously. And so they asked me if I would give a talk because they had read some of my work on human-centered data science and social data science and some of the things that I've written about in relation to those themes. Sort of after pursuing, kind of their goals with this particular conference, I thought it was a great opportunity to really get some of those ideas out there, talk about them, not just write about them. And so I put together this talk on essentially moving towards a more human-centered data science. I wanted to provide the opportunity here to record the presentation. They translated my presentation into Turkish. Because I'm passionate about this topic, and I also think it's a super important topic to continue to kind of put content out in the world, pushing people and motivating them and inspiring them to kind of pursue these ideas. I thought I'd put this video together and give you a reenactment of my talk. This talk is towards a more human-centered data science, and the idea is to not only bring the issue of humanity to data science, but also to give us a framework and maybe also some suggested next steps for really thinking about putting some of those activities into action so that we have a way forward to more explicitly incorporate kind of human sciences and data sciences. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. So in this particular talk, obviously my background is part of the reason why I'm passionate about human-centered data science is because it combines my two professional worlds. My training is largely in social and quantitative and health psychology, from an education perspective and academic perspective. But I took a lot of that training and moved it into the business world in data science. This talk and this theme and these ideas are really a blending of those two worlds for me. I'm passionate about both human sciences and the role of data in promoting and understanding and excelling those human experiences. The motivation behind the topic, the motivation behind a lot of what I do, is really captured in some of the ideas that I present here. So just 5 years ago, Andrew Ng said this quote. He said, "Just as electricity transformed almost everything 100 years ago, today I actually have a hard time thinking of an industry that I don't think AI will transform in the next several years." And that was just 5 years ago. And even in that short period of time, we have really witnessed the pervasiveness of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is becoming more and more ubiquitous in our lives. So here are a few key kind of facts that really help to highlight how pervasive artificial intelligence is becoming and where the trend is really moving, which is to become even more ubiquitous and even more pervasive, just like electricity is today for modern society, to use Andrew Ng's analogy. But the global AI market value is expected to reach 267 billion by 2027. It'll probably beat that estimate, is my guess. 37% of businesses have adopted artificial intelligence as of 2021. More than 3 billion voice assistants are now in use, and that is expected to grow to 8 billion by 2023. And 67% of Americans believe that self-driving cars are actually safer than regular cars. So a little bit different there, but I put that one in there because it does help to point to the complexity of what the consequences are of having pervasive artificial intelligence. And part of my approach is to bring both of those dimensions, or multiple dimensions, into a more human-centered data science, in order to really understand how to capture, and bring those two worlds together for the benefit of both. I think we need to understand the different dimensions on which they operate. So let me start with a story. Meet Midas. In Midas is a stands for the Michigan Integrated Data Automated System. Midas was built as an artificially intelligent product and solution that was built to collect unemployment taxes, pay unemployment benefits, identify potential cases of fraud. And in 2021 alone, Midas processed over $35 billion in unemployment claims. So, by all intents and purposes, Midas is actually a pretty big success from an artificial intelligence, automation, kind of data science perspective, especially for the state of Michigan. But let's meet Jason. So, Jason is a working professional. He's in his 30s. He's married to his wife, Sirietta. They have a newborn child. And Jason is employed by Ford Motor Company in Michigan. So I think you can kind of see where this is going. But one day, Jason woke up to check his bank account, expecting his weekly paycheck. And what he saw in that bank account was a paycheck that was $200 less than it had been the week before. In 2015, Midas flagged Jason as a potential perpetrator of fraud and began automatically garnishing his wages. No court case, no notification for Jason, nothing. Just essentially automated fraud remediation. At least that's as far as I understand it. Here's a quote from a news story by Jason. He basically said, I looked online and it said I owed $84,000 without very much explanation. And he said he pursued that, tried to figure out what was going on, got very little information. So what happened here? What's going on? What happened in Michigan? Essentially, what happened is that in 2015, Midas identified 25,472 fraud cases, of which one was Jason's. 93% model accuracy was the accuracy rate of the artificial intelligence or the data science model, the machine learning model that was driving these predictions for potential cases of fraud. That model was 93% accurate. Now, for all intents and purposes, a lot of data science teams would be pretty happy about that. 93% is pretty darn accurate. The problem is that when you have 25,000 fraud cases identified, 1,783 people are almost certainly not going to be happy with that 93% accuracy, because those are the people at risk for false positives. And those are the faces that are lost behind these numbers. And so those include people like Jason. They include people like Robert, people like Nancy, and people like Kevin. All of these individuals, a part of that 1,700 who were falsely identified as perpetrators of unemployment fraud, who had automatic garnishes to their wages that led to some significant consequences and disruptions in their lives, some having to file for bankruptcy and other things. Unfortunately, the story here with Midas isn't an isolated event for artificial intelligence. And as artificial intelligence becomes even more pervasive in our lives, it interacts and affects so many more things that we do as humans. We are learning about more and more of these instances where our artificial intelligence has sort of failed, and for some good reason. Here are a few other examples. Amazon developed a hiring algorithm that was used to go through and automatically process the tens of thousands of resumes that Amazon gets for open positions. That algorithm tries to identify the best possible candidates for each open position. Upon further review, it was identified that that algorithm had learned to use gender as a penalty on fit for different open positions. So the implication here is that you could have a man and a woman with effectively very similar or the same experiences, but because one is a woman, it's being negatively attributed to that job. So there was some bias going into that data, probably more male applicants in the original training set than there were females. So it learned to bias against females incorrectly in this case. Not just the artificial intelligence models that are biased that are creating issues, but even just the way in which we collect data is often biased. And here's a really interesting recent example. A skin sensor that measures blood oxygen was identified or found to be inaccurate on darker skin tones. So fundamental, creating bias in the very data that's being collected. And then here's also just another interesting kind of impact of the ubiquity of artificial intelligence and all the different ways it affects how humans interact. That it has these human interactive and sort of real kind of policy implications. This last bullet point here on the government of South Africa granting the first patent to an artificially intelligent author. So on previous episodes of This Week in AI, I've covered some of this stuff, but this one in particular, I find it as really interesting. In this case, a data scientist developed an algorithm that would produce novel invention ideas. And one of the ideas was so good, according to the data scientist, that the data scientist thought this could be patentable. So that individual went about trying to patent that particular idea and didn't put himself as the author, but rather put the model or the bot, whatever you want to call it, the artificially intelligent model, the solution that was generating the ideas. That was the author. And the only government, he went to multiple governments, one of the only governments that actually approved the patent was the government of South Africa, basically stating that the owner of that patent is not even alive. It was artificial. So that has real human consequences. Each of these has real human consequences. And really that's the goal here. That's the point, is to reorient and highlight the human collateral associated with artificial intelligence and all the different ways that its ubiquity are affecting and interacting with the way in which that we go about trying to interact with the world and interact with each other. So a human-centered data science tries to reorient our pursuit of leveraging data to be able to advance, humanity, but to reorient that pursuit around the humans that they impact. So a human-centered data science recognizes that data are fundamentally created by and for humans. That data are used because humans have a need for that data to be collected and used. In the case of this virtual conference that I gave, digital experiences create digital artifacts or data, but those digital experiences are created to facilitate human interaction in this context, and that's true for really any device or any digital application or whatever it may be that creates data. That data are being created to serve a human purpose, and so we need to understand that, and we need to appreciate that the decisions that are made around the collection of that data are also human decisions. Human-centered data science recognizes that humans are also fundamentally biased, that we as individuals are biased, but in addition, we as collective institutions are biased as well. And so that creates opportunities for bias to creep in to the way in which we build solutions for artificial intelligence. We have to understand that. Human-centered data science also seeks to understand the human impact of AI on two dimensions. One is the impact of how humans build their artificially intelligent solutions. So the way in which bias creeps into those builds, the way in which other sort of issues, the way in which we select data and select what we should even build are all human decisions that affect how we're building artificial intelligence. But when we build them and then we go deploy them in the world and they start interacting with other humans, those have other consequences. And those other consequences can also be understood from a human-centered perspective. I'll uncover these two dimensions in a bit more detail in the next slide, but ultimately we want to be able to leverage the human sciences to reduce the negative consequences of data science, machine learning, and artificially intelligent products. So here is a model that helps to kind of provide a framework for thinking about those two different dimensions of what I'm talking about in bringing about a more human centered data science. So, on the one hand, you have the build, which is how humans affect data science. And some of the core topics that we need to have at top of mind include things like where bias can creep in our artificially intelligent product builds. Um, Whether or not we may be missing important data elements or data features as a part of those solutions, which will create other problems when we go to deploy them. Also, the ability to understand why our models are producing the outputs that they're producing. Why are our artificially intelligent solutions providing the responses that they're providing? We need to have model explainability, model transparency. That is fundamentally a pursuit of bringing more of a human perspective to the build of artificial intelligence. On the other side, you have, once we build them and deploy them, how those things interact with humans in the wild. So that is how data science affects humans. And some of the core topics that we need to be concerned about include things like the idea that artificial intelligence can be an existential threat for people. What do I mean by that? Well, it's expected that something like 80% of manufacturing jobs will be completely automated with artificial intelligence in like the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, 80%. So if you work in manufacturing, you might get a little concerned about your job. So the artificial intelligence as an industry and as products, right, form existential threats for me. And that becomes a concern. And my response to that are things that we understand and we can understand because social sciences have studied those things. And so we need to bring those things to the center stage and understanding how the deployment of those technologies may impact those people. Artificial relationships. The idea that we can interact in a more human way with these artificial and artificially intelligent products start to create psychological consequences around forming relationships with those artificial things. That's also important from a human perspective to understand what those consequences are, how do we help to mitigate them, how do we help to take the best components of them and celebrate them and pursue them more truthfully and try and mitigate the more negative consequences. And then finally, cognitive reliance is another issue. We're seeing, for example, that we as individuals who are exposed to so many different artificially intelligent products, that we're beginning to rely on those products. And that reliance, that cognitive reliance, has real biological consequences for the way in which our brain functions. A really good example is some research that's been done recently on Google Maps. We really don't ask people for directions anymore because we have Google Maps on our smartphones. So we don't need to ask people for directions. That has consequences. That's one fewer human interaction that we have. But in addition to that, we have a reliance on the tool. That reliance on the tool starts to mean we offload some of our cognitive effort that we may have used previously to focus us on like getting somewhere, recognizing where you are, to just looking at a device now that shows you and tells you when you should turn right or left. The sort of follow-on consequence of that is that we also start to have a significant amount of trust in the solutions or the results that those artificially intelligent products are providing. So remember a few slides ago, I provided you with a statistic that said something like 67% of Americans believe that self-driving cars are more effective than human-driven cars, that they're safer. And that really highlights the idea that we are developing a social trust around a lot of these artificially intelligent products. And that has consequences too that we can understand, we can hypothesize about, and we can start to get ahead of in order to really celebrate what they're good at and mitigate what they may be harming. How do we do that? We do that by inserting the social sciences in between these two dimensions of understanding how artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science are impacting us as a human race. We have entire disciplines of human behavioral social sciences that have studied these very complex human things. And those areas of study, the things that they've learned, have a really tremendous opportunity to inform us about how these consequences may play out and also provide us with potential alternatives, different decisions that we can make in the builds and the deploys that will help to mitigate some of those negative consequences. So, social psychology, user experience research, sociology, anthropology, all of these social sciences have a major role to play in bringing about a more human centered data science. So, what are some next steps? What are some actionable things that you can start to do if this is a passion for you too, and this is something you also feel is important, like I do? Number one, seek interdisciplinary data teams that include the social sciences. Allow the social sciences to inform some of the decisions that we're making around the builds and deploys of artificially intelligent solutions. We need to develop best practices. We need a bias checklist. Every data science team across every company should have a freely accessible checklist of all the different sources of bias that they need to go about checking in their models before deploying them. And that's even more important for some of those who are in positions that have significant human consequence, like in the case of the legal industry or healthcare, real human consequences there. And so we need to understand where bias might creep in. And there's a lot of research that is starting to provide us with information on what are some of those things we need to check in our models. In addition to that, we need also to understand what are the well-supported social theories in research that we should consider as candidates to help inform our decision making. So just as major biological theories have become commonplace in the way in which we communicate on our day to day, like theories of evolution or major physics theories, those things become commonplace. We need major social theories to also become more and more commonplace in those conversations. Finally, user experience design principles. I think every data science team needs to have an understanding of user design principles and really consider which of those principles they need to include into their product builds and their product deploys to be able to really understand the decisions they're making from a data and a modeling perspective. Those include things like really highlighting the importance of intuition, highlighting the importance of building products that are easy to use, that sort of enable the user in a way that the user can integrate with quickly and easily. I think, but most importantly, probably the most important principle from human-centered design or human user experience that I've put out here in the final bullet point is that we need to keep humans in the loop. As we saw in the story of Midas and Jason, the reason that became such a big problem was because humans were not involved in the decision making that had very real human consequences, taking money out of people's pockets. And so we need to always keep humans in the loop and find ways to do that that still allow us to take advantage of all of the benefits that we get from artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, everything, you name it. So with that, I leave you with this. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you have been inspired and maybe even perhaps share some of my interest in this area. And also maybe I have given you some ideas for thinking about what steps you might take to helping to bring about an approach that really emphasizes the importance of humanity in our digital and increasingly digital world. So thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed my reenactment of my talk and more to come, obviously, for me. So have a great day.